Welcome everyone to the August 2020 edition of the Collaborative Mentoring Webinar Series, and thank you for joining us today. Our topic this month is capacity building strategies to increase funding for your mentoring organization. My name is Benji Thurber, and I'm the Communications Director for Mentor Vermont, and I will be facilitating today's conversation. This webinar is a part of the monthly Collaborative Mentoring Webinar Series, which is hosted by Mentor National in collaboration with a planning team of professionals from Mentor affiliates across the country, including Mentor California, Mentor Colorado, Mentor Indiana, Mentor North Carolina, and Mentor Vermont. All of these webinars take place live, but are also recorded and hosted on the Mentor National website. Before we get started, I wanted to just quickly share some housekeeping information. In 1 week, all of you who are on today's webinar will receive an email with information about how to download a copy of these slides and view the webinar recording. You can also access this information directly by going to Mentor's website within the next week. And to continually improve this series, we're looking for your input as well. And so as you exit the webinar today, at the end of our conversation, a short survey will pop up, and we hope that you'll take a couple of minutes to give us your feedback. We want this to be a participatory experience, so we invite you to use the question box to ask questions throughout the webinar. I'll be drawing from some of these during the Q&A portion at the end of the webinar, and I apologize in advance. We may not get to answer all of the questions because there are several hundred of you on the webinar today, but we will do our best. First, before we get started, we wanted to get a sense of who is with us on the webinar today. So we have two short polls. The first poll is, we'd like to know, are you involved with fundraising at your organization? And so it looks like a little more than half of you are involved directly with fundraising. The second poll for today is, how many people are involved in the fundraising process at your organization? So it looks like we have a nice mix. We have about 40% in total people represented on this call, where it's either one or two people involved with fundraising, and then we have about 40% where it's three or more. So thank you, everyone, and I hope that today's information will be applicable to everybody who's joining us for today's conversation. And it is now my pleasure to introduce our presenter today, Jen Hazlett. I first met Jen as a student in her graduate course on fundraising and development through the Center for New Leadership here in Vermont. And I wanted to say just briefly, throughout my career, I've worked with a variety of different fundraising and capacity building consultants, but I really found Jen's perspective and her style to be the most effective for someone like me working at a smaller nonprofit. Jen has a great combination of real life experience, having worked as a fundraiser herself, and also working as a consultant for a range of smaller nonprofits across Vermont and New England. She loves to draw from real life examples and has a very engaging presentation style. And so I realize this is a bigger group today, but I think she will do her best to make this an interactive experience for everybody who's on the webinar today. Before handing things off to Jen, I wanted to just briefly share some background on why we chose this topic and the focus for today's webinar. We know from Mentor's National Program Survey that the vast majority of youth mentoring programs across the country are smaller scale programs that serve 100 mentor matches or fewer. And we also know, and I can talk from firsthand experience from working with mentoring programs in Vermont, that smaller mentoring programs often have limited staff time and are pulled in different directions. Their time is split between supporting mentor matches, trying to recruit new volunteer mentors, and also trying to do the fundraising piece as well to keep the lights on. So in this webinar, we're inviting Jen to help us explore some proven fundraising strategies for smaller organizations that we hope can be applied to the youth mentoring programs on today's call. So without further ado, I'd love to pass the mic over to Jen. Jen, take it away.
Oh, thanks, Benji. Really appreciate that lovely introduction. It was truly a pleasure to have Benji in my first fundraising and development certificate program that we ran last year. We're going to be running that again this coming winter online. So I'll tell you more about that later at the end of the call. But it's, my work is really focused on small to mid-sized nonprofits and with smaller staffs. And I know many of you are coming from that perspective. So we're going to be really focusing today on coming away with a basic understanding of how you can reach out to the people who are already involved in your organization, the volunteers, the members, the board members, how you can really have them involved in your work. And I'll hope that you'll leave today with a framework for beginning to get your goal setting in place, and that most importantly, you'll leave with a little more confidence and some tips about how to reach out to people to do the work that really matters of your organization. So we'll get started, and thanks for being here, everyone. To start with, we're going to look at what is capacity building. That's a phrase that gets like passed around, and often you're able to apply for funding for capacity building. And capacity building is the foundation on which your organization is built. Some example activities: strengthening boards, building technological resources, engaging volunteers, and fundraising, building partnerships. So we're going to really focus today on three pieces. One, building partnerships and engaging volunteers, and focusing your fundraising efforts through the people that really matter and really care about your organization. Now, when you think, I have a number of different activities here, typical fundraising activities that your organization might be involved with. And I'd love to see in the chat, what do you think are the fundraising activities which typically bring in the most funding? Love to hear what people have to say. What do you think typically brings in the most funding? I see people writing foundation grants, and for many of you that may be true. Personalized letter, corporate sponsorships. Now I have some seeing personal connections, special events. So the answers are all over the map, and all of these pieces join together to make a really robust and active fundraising program. I have somebody here who's writing face-to-face and legacy giving. Legacy giving is giving somebody writing in their will primarily to the organization and making a planned gift, saying that they want to give in their death. So wonderful, lots of great answers here, all really important and all part of an active fundraising program. What's at the base of all of these activities is that people give to people. Relationships really matter. And it's important to think about how you are really engaging with your donors and the people who really care about your work in developing and engaging those relationships even further. The more personalization, the better. It's hard to do at a small nonprofit, but this is where the greatest payoff is. And you may be surprised, some of you not, looking at the chat, to learn that face-to-face fundraising is by far the most effective in terms of hours spent to bring in and increase support for a small nonprofit. Now, many of you may not be doing that yet, and that's one of the things that we're going to touch on and begin to look at today. because in fact, people give 5 to 10 times more in person than that they will give over the phone or through the mail. That's generally speaking, 5 to 10 times more. So part of that is about looking at who gives in the United States. And this is a chart that from 2019. And I'm wondering, as you look at that, are there any surprises there for you? You can put your answers in the chat if you wish. Any surprises as you look at who gives in the United States? And I have people saying, yes, right, but yikes, it's COVID. Is that still the case? So we're going to go into that and talk about that today. Wondering whether, what is it that our virtual options? So thanks for asking that. We're not going to go deep into how to do this virtually, but I'm going to touch on it, and I go more in depth on that in other trainings. And so we'll make sure to touch on that later today. I have somebody saying, I would have thought corporations would give more. It is a little surprising, isn't it? And someone else saying, really wish large corporations did a better job of giving. Yes, we can all wish that. And in fact, some wonderful corporations are really doing good and important work. But the important thing to be thinking about here is how can you engage your folks? And what I'm doing by sharing this slide with you is to give you a little courage, a little thinking about how can I think about who the individuals are who I really care about and care about our organization, and helping them really support your organization. We know that people give to people, and that's the thing that we want to be keeping in our minds today. Now, to that question, can we really ask for people for support during the pandemic? And the answer is, yes, you can. It's hard, and so many people have lost their jobs. Finances have changed for so many. And finances have, you know, for some of us on this call, we know that the situation has really hit us hard and the people we love. And yet, people who already care about your work still care. And they want you to keep doing your good work. We need to be communicating with the folks who are already engaged and checking in with them. Somebody said, how can we be doing this during the pandemic? We can be calling them. We can create Zoom calls. There's a whole way of connecting with donors and talking online with folks. You can be creating meetings where you invite larger groups of people in to talk about your work. And in fact, some of my clients that I work with are having incredible success of bringing in people who care about their work to informational gatherings on Zoom and saying, come and hear what we're doing. Come and hear how we're moving and we're shifting during this time. And they're actually able to engage in larger groups now in ways that they've never been able to before. So what we need to do is let the supporter decide what they can and can't do. People want to be part of something larger than themselves. What most donors want is to make a positive difference in the world, to be part of a community, and to be appreciated. So what we want to be doing as part of this work is to really be thinking about how can we bring people in, or the people who are already involved and already care about us, how can we create a community where people are engaged and understanding what we're doing and we're telling our stories. Because capacity building is a team sport. We can't be doing it alone and in a vacuum. It doesn't work very well, for one thing, but it's so anxiety producing. We want to be gathering together with those people who really care about our work and talk with them about how we're going to move forward. One thing that I really encourage you to do, if you haven't already done it, is that you're creating a community outreach and capacity building team in advisory, asking people for help with goal setting, asking for outreach to community members, asking people to become ambassadors and askers for your organization. Things to be thinking about when you're inviting people in is previous planning or fundraising experience. Do they have strong organizational communication and research skills? Are they creative? Are they connected in multiple different ways? You're looking for diverse voices, parents, mentors, people outside your organization, not just the couple of staff members who are actively thinking about this work. Try to broaden your thinking when you're looking at this work. I also really am encouraging folks to be building a communications advisory. It's sort of separate from the planning and fundraising activity. It's a group of people who you're asking, will you please look at my materials before I send them out? Before I send an email about our annual appeal and asking people to make a contribution, before I send out my newsletter, will you take a peek at it? And the important piece here is also diversity. You're looking for diverse ages, you're looking for diverse experience, gender, race, socioeconomic diversity, really thinking about who do we need to be looking at our materials. It's especially really important right now. Many of my clients have been holding back and not asking other people to look at their materials. They are producing things on such a tight timeline. They're getting that thing out, they're finishing it at midnight and sending it out at 9 o'clock the next morning, and they might have a staff member or two look at it. And the problem with that is that we often are so insular and looking at our own things, and it doesn't make sense to a wider audience. So when you build your communications advisory, you want to make sure that you tell people exactly what you need. You say, I want you to look at this, and I need it on a tight timeline, and if you can't get to it, that's okay. And you build a large enough advisory group that in fact you have the time, you're letting people know that if they can't get to it, it's okay, right? And you set clear expectations around turnaround. It's a game changer for so many people. For one thing, you're not communicating in a vacuum, and you're bringing your constituents in. Another thing you're doing is you're developing relationships. You're engaging with people on your work. You're not needing to build capacity on your own. You're actually creating a community of organizations and people supporting your work. Can you really ask mentors and board members for help? They already give so much of their time. I can't tell you how many people in my work have said this to me. Oh, we can't ask Sam. He gives his life to our organization. He's an amazing mentor. He spends so much time. We can't ask him to be on an advisory. We certainly can't ask him to give a financial gift because he gives the gift of his time. Can you really? Yes, you can. Volunteers are invested. I'm noticing in the chat that we have some people having problems with hearing, and I'm hoping that that is actually solidified. I'm seeing that people are talking with Minnie about phone numbers and stuff. So please let me know, Minnie, if you have trouble hearing me. I hope that everybody's getting that settled. I'm also noting in the chat that there's some troubles with the handout. There's 2 handouts, and we'll talk about them throughout the presentation. And if you can't access them, don't worry, Minnie will send you PDFs. So you will definitely have those handouts, and I hope that they'll be helpful to you. So, so thanks for letting us know that there were problems. We really appreciate that. So to the volunteers piece, volunteers are invested in your organization. In a 2015 Fidelity charitable study, 87% of volunteers say that they give financially where they volunteer. 42% volunteer before giving, 58% give and then volunteer. Volunteers are important to ask. Let them decide if they can or they cannot. That is their choice. You need to give them the opportunity. It's respectful to give them the opportunity. They are already giving so much and they care about your work. It's their work. So I'd love to see in the chat, do you ask your volunteers for financial support? And do your volunteers make contributions to your organization? Love to see what people have to say. So we have some people saying yes, some people saying no. Laura Leporati says yes, we do, and yes, they do. And we have some people saying no, we haven't, not in the past. Tricky school corporation. There's a lot of variety of answers here. And so somebody's saying, no, we've taken the belief that they already do so much. Only a small number have given. Yes, they are already doing so much. And they may also wish to give to you financially, particularly if they know that you really need the support. So part of what you're wanting to do is articulate your case and letting them know. For many people, they don't really understand that you may really need that. What we want to be thinking about is thinking about involving people broadly, not just asking them for contributions, but getting our board members and mentors involved in reaching out to others as well. They already care, they may know, may have contacts. So a way to get them initially involved, potentially even before asking them for their own contributions, although I would argue people are a lot better askers for others if they've already made their own financial contribution, but gifts of time and energy, just as valuable. So I can go and ask for a contribution of others to a corporation, foundation, or friends, or other groups that I'm involved with, if I care and I'm involved. So you want to get your board members and mentors already reaching out. And yes, Susanna says they can speak firsthand about their experience with us. Absolutely, right on. So I'm going to talk about an activity to do. And this is one of your handouts. Okay, so one of the things that happens often with boards and volunteers is the staff will say, in an email to their board members, we really need to build our base of support. And we'd like you all to come to the next board meeting with the names of 10 people who we can ask for contributions. And then I hear back from my clients, we asked them for help, but they didn't give us any names. And I think that is unfortunately really the wrong way to go about it. And it's so common. It's so understandable that you would do it that way. Well, for one thing, people get overwhelmed. I can't think of 10 people. I can't think of 5 people. So one thing that I encourage is to ask people to think of one person. Ask your board members and your mentors to think of one person who they wish was more engaged with your mentoring organization and who they think might be a good candidate to either begin supporting the organization or to increase their support. This is a handout that I've created for you that you can actually just share with your board members and your mentors. Now, when you ask them to think of somebody, you want them to think of somebody who is in your community who would likely be interested. So in other words, you don't want them to say, well, have you talked to Bill Gates? Not helpful, right? Not to say that Bill Gates might not want to support Mentor National, but he's not likely to be looking at your individual small organization. So we want to think to scale. Who is in our community? In that handout, there are 10 questions to help you bring that one person into focus, or to help your mentors bring that one person into focus. We ask the mentors to think about their involvement with your mentoring organization. And part of that activity is to ask your mentors, what do we want that one person to feel about our mentoring organization? What do we want them to know about our mentoring organization? And what do we want them to do? What do we want them to, how do we want them to act? What's the call to action? We start with feel. We start with feel because we don't want to go right to the action. We want that person to give us a gift. That's not where we start. We want to start with thinking about what's the importance of our work. So something we might think about, we want them to feel that we're an important organization and we change lives. We want them to feel trusting of us. We want them to feel that our work really matters. And if we start from that place of what we want them to feel, then our message is focused on the heart. And that's where we want to start, because all of your work is changing lives. And that's where we want to begin in our conversations. So that think of one person handout is a way to engage with your board members and your mentors and ask them to think of one person. Because what happens is if we don't think of people, we'll never ask. Because the number one reason for not giving, I wasn't asked. People say that again and again in donor surveys across the country over many years. People will say, well, they never asked me. You can't expect people to know and contribute and support you unless you let them know that you'd like their help and their participation. And what do? You start with story. Your stories of your organization, the important work of your organization. And I know you all have stories. The kinds of stories that make a difference in people's lives just by hearing them, but you're sharing the meaning of your work. Benji shared with me just the other day about this wonderful organization locally. It's called Living Proof Mentoring, just started. And it was started by a man named Wayne, who grew up in the Upper Valley of Vermont, New Hampshire, which is where I live. And he was a Black man in a very white community. Vermont is not such a diverse place, more diverse now, but certainly not when Wayne was growing up. And certainly we have a long way to go in diversity. And he had a lot of struggles in his life as a person of color in this community, but he had an amazing mentor through Dartmouth College, a person of color, a young person, a student who changed his life. So Wayne has now, flash forward today, he's an adult and he's raising a family in this community, and he's created this wonderful organization for people of color to work with young people of color in our community, a brand new organization. And he is raising funds now by telling the story of his own life and the way that how a difference was made with him and how he's working to make a difference with others. One story, but by Wayne telling that story, the story of his own life, he's bringing many people in who want to make a change in young people's lives. You all have your own stories. And one thing we know is that stories work. Stories over stats. There was some research done with a hunger organization several years ago. And they did 2 appeals, print appeals. They sent out the written appeals. And it was the story of Ruthie. Ruthie was a young girl who was hungry. And Ruthie, by getting her meals in the summer from this hunger organization, her life was changed. And they asked people to make a contribution and in telling Ruthie's story about how Ruthie's young life was changed. That was appeal number 1. Then appeal number 2 told the story of Ruthie, but they also said that in supporting our organization, you will support the thousands of children just like Ruthie. And they talked a lot about the numbers of children who are hungry. And unfortunately and sadly, number 1 greatly out-earned number 2. Why do you think that is? You can make your notes in the chat. Why do you think that number 1, where we just talked about one person in their lives, as opposed to number 2, where we also talked about the biggest numbers? What's the change there? So Julie says empathy is the mover. And Amy says number 2 felt too overwhelming. Both of those are true. If I'm not a super wealthy person and I'm thinking about giving you $25 and I know that thousands of people are hungry, I may think my $25 isn't going to make a difference, right? But my $25 could put food on the table for Ruthie. So that's something to really be thinking about. Statistics are important. They're especially important in grant writing. You need to be able to share your stats. But for individuals, heart over head is the way to go. You want to prepare your stats because some people will ask, right? So if you're having an individual conversation, they may really want to hear the statistics about how many people you're serving and who your mentors are. But focusing on the personal and the story, it's okay to just tell the story about one kid and the difference that your organization has made in their lives. Really wonderful. And Pamela says, am I in the chat? Yes, you are. We see you. So even if you can't see yourself, we can see you. So thanks for everybody for contributing. Really appreciate that. So thinking about storytelling, we want to create effective stories that engage your audience. And these are some specific ways that you can do that. So we have a relatable character. We want to bring emotion. What's the emotion you want the audience to feel? What's the problem that you're trying to solve? So even if you're just telling the story of one student, you want to try to pull in all of these elements. The problem is they were disengaged. The solution was our mentor supported them. What role did your organization take in that solution? And what action do you want people to take after reading the story? Really key. What's the call to action? I can't tell you how many appeals I have read by really fabulous organizations who are smart and thoughtful people, where myself as the outsider is really not clear what I'm being asked to do. I'm being told a story, but what are you asking me to do? Are you asking me to volunteer? Are you asking me to contribute? So making sure that call to action is really clear is essential. And that's why I would like you to circling back to that idea of that advisory committee. That advisory committee can help you answer that question. So one of the questions you always want to ask your advisors is it really clear what I'm asking the reader to do when they read this story? I'd love to hear in the chat, how do you share mentoring stories from your organization? I know many people already do a wonderful job, and love to hear what it is that you are doing. What is it that you're doing? Wonderful. I have lots of people responding. We have e-blasts, social media, newsletter. Oh, somebody produced a video of testimonials, quarterly newsletter, video storytelling from the founder and the CEO, open house, Facebook, volunteer recognition event. Wonderful. You all are doing some really good work. Group emails and social media. So really powerful, powerful work. And what's important, again, back to this story sharing, is doing it as widely as possible. So I have a lot of people saying social media. And one thing I want to encourage you to do, if you're not already doing it, is asking your mentors to share the stories on their own social media. That's one way you can very specifically ask for their support. Asking parents to share, having your advisory group, always sharing the social media posts with them and asking them to reshare. Don't just share it with them and expect that they're going to reshare. Very specifically ask a group of people to please consider sharing everything that you post, or the ones that really resonate with them. I'm noticing even with some really sophisticated organizations that's a missing piece. So really encouraging you to do that as much as possible. One thing that is really a fabulous thing that many people don't know about is asking for matches. So I'm really going to encourage you to think about asking for matches. And when I say a match, a challenge match, I'm encouraging you to either ask for one donor or a group of donors. So this is a fabulous way to get your mentors involved and your board members, if you're involved, if you have an advisory board, is to ask a whole group of people, would they combine their giving and come up with a healthy chunk, $5,000 or more if possible, to put out into the world and say, our mentors who already give so much of their time and energy and love to our students are putting their money on the table and asking our community to also give to our program. And they have come up with a match. So every dollar that we raise will be doubled up to this dollar figure, because our mentors and our volunteers care so much about our work, because actually they really work. When we see others give, we are encouraged to give, and that's part of that sense of being part of something greater than ourselves. Really an important piece. Part of what I'm encouraging you to do is to plan. Hard to do as busy as you are, and many of you probably already doing a beautiful job planning, but so many organizations don't plan. And it's essential. It's the most productive use of everybody's time, and organizations with plans increase their resources. So work the plan and plan the work. How do you do that? Well, one place to start is with SMART goals. So many of you may know the term SMART goals, and I've co-opted it. So SMART goals are often used in HR, in setting people's individual goals for the year. You might have people talk about SMART goals, and I've changed it around to make sense with the fundraising work. And SMART goals are, I start with so what, the big so what. So what is the why? So often people say, we'd like to raise $10,000, or we'd like to raise $50,000, or we'd like to raise $100,000. They have these big lofty fundraising goals, maybe not lofty, maybe essential for their work. but they don't talk about why is this important? What is this? What is this money actually going to do? So as you're setting your goals, and this is another handout, by the way, if you haven't had a chance to look at it yet, Minnie will make sure that you get it. It's attached to the presentation. So this what I have here on the slide is repeated in the handout, and then there's even more information in the handout so that you can begin to dig in to helping create the nugget or the core of your own plan. So we want to start with our so what, the big why. Where do we want to grow and improve? How is this goal meaningful? So starting with the why. And if you haven't seen Simon Sinek's, S-I-N-E-K, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing his name quite right, fabulous TED Talk on Start With Why. Really, really a wonderful TED Talk. So we want to start with why and then look at our metrics. We are starting with past performance. So often, embarrassingly, board members will say, this year we want you to raise X dollars. And they're not looking back at what was actually raised last year and what's realistic, and setting goals that are based upon past performance and looking at specific areas. Very important. So we start with why, we look at our metrics, and then what are our tactics? How are we going to get there? Do we need to be trained? Do we need to be coached? Do we need software? What do we need as tactics in order to actually get to where we want to go? And then looking at relationships. And this is not necessarily in order. Relationships, I might argue, go right under the why, right? Who are the people that care most about our work or have the capacity to really give larger gifts to our organization? In terms of actually being able to increase your financial support, as important as an annual appeal is, as important as events are or were during pre-COVID, as important as a raffle or, selling your hats or your scarves or whatever it is that you're selling to bring in additional funding, the biggest and most effective way to bring in increased financial support is to talk to the people who have the capacity to give larger gifts. And I encourage you to think about the 5 most important potential donors to your organization. Who are those 5 folks? And can you actually engage and have a conversation with them and ask them to increase their support? It's best to start with people who already care. So going back to that think of one person activity, who are the people that your mentors have brought in? Who are your mentors, and do they have the capacity to potentially give larger gifts? And have a conversation with them. There's a whole art and science to how to do that. We're not going to really go deeply into that today. I do a lot of that work in training people on one-on-one fundraising and how to do it face-to-face and how to do it online. So feel free to reach out to me or go to my website and learn more about the kind of work that I do relative to that. We don't have enough time to go deeply today, but I'll say that relationships matter, and starting there is really an essential piece. So as we then think about our plan, we want to be accountable and set specific goals and timelines. It's really easy to talk about all of this and then not say exactly when you're going to do it. So really important to be thinking about when and how and who, and some of that is on that handout to begin to do that planning. So when thinking about the summary of all of this today and what we've been talking about, well, it's thinking about individual giving. Individual giving is really essential. Most philanthropy comes from individuals. The more involved the donor, the greater the gift. And volunteers give more. 5 out of 10 households in the United States give to charities. And people give because they were asked. People respond to stories. Face-to-face asks are the most effective. And donors generally give 5 to 10 times more in person than through the mail. That does not mean that your newsletter, your communications, your appeals, your e-appeals, your social media is unimportant. They are essential. They help create the fabric and the message and the understanding and the depth of what your organization does. They're important touches. They're essential. And we also want to be talking to individuals. All of it combines to really deepen people's involvement and engagement with the work that really matters and being able to support your essential and important mentoring work. In order to ask for support, you need to articulate your program's mission, vision, and values. And share your passion and the stories of your impact, starting with your own juice, your own caring, really getting centered in why this matters to you as you're writing the stories and as you're talking to people. That's the most important place to start, and helping your mentors articulate that, helping your mentors really get clear about how to talk about your organization so that they can help bring those folks in and really be a partner with you. Important to stay realistic, but also positive. In these difficult times, it's pretty easy to get down and feel like it's not a good time to ask because so many are struggling. But it's really an important time because we don't want our programs to go away. We want all of this good work to keep happening. And there are people in our communities who do continue to have resources. They're not going on vacations. Maybe they're retired and they have a steady stream of income. Staying positive and knowing that it's okay to ask and that it's up to the donor to make a decision about whether they can. You want to ask in a tender and generous way to allow people to do what they need to do. So not accosting them, making it an invitation to do important work and be part of your community. Part of asking for support is knowing your community and developing partnerships. Partnerships with other nonprofit organizations, other schools, other mentoring programs. It's very important to really be engaging with all of your deeper community around you, and sort of going back to that planning group and that and your advisory group, building your partnerships as much as possible, because in these difficult times, it's going to even be more important. And larger funders, grantors, and foundations and corporations really want to see that kind of communication and collaboration happening. And again, kind of harping on this one, involve your volunteers. They're your dream team. They're the ones who care about you the most because they know your work. And finally, you've got to ask. You've got to ask people to support you if you want them to help. Confidence comes with practice. Look at that face. I love this picture. It's sometimes hard to ask. People struggle with asking, but practicing with your colleagues, practicing with your mentors, asking for help and saying, I know that I need to go and talk to this person. I'd love to talk with you about how we're going to do that. Reaching out to me or other coaches who have a lot of experience in helping people do this work. There are resources out there. So I invite you to ask questions. Benji is going to stay on the line. We've got another I think 10 plus minutes to think about questions now, and we'd love to hear from you. Oops. Advanced a little far.
Great, thank you, Jen. I have a couple of questions that have come through already, but I welcome people to continue submitting them into the chat box as we go through the Q&A section. So the first question I have for you, Jen, is could you walk us through an example or maybe a couple of examples of some effective virtual presentations that some organizations you've worked with have done with donors and supporters?
Sure. Yeah, what a great question. So they're all over the map. So I'll try to give a few different examples. One virtual presentation of one of my clients did was they're in the process of reorienting themselves in this time of COVID and the way that they're managing their services, as I'm sure many of you are doing, right? I mean, obviously you have to. So I know many of you are doing mentoring online and through Zoom, right? So, or other platforms. And so it's a whole new world, and there's so many pieces, right? And the world of supporters or potential supporters is interested in what that world looks like. So one of my clients put out a general, a big invitation to say, we're having an open conversation about what it is that we're doing and how we're doing it differently. And we'd love to share with you and answer your questions. And they had a lot of people sign up. And they did a webinar. They brought in their, so the executive director spoke, the program director spoke, and one of the clients spoke, and somebody who was doing direct services spoke. So I think they had 4 speakers, and they each spoke for about, I don't remember exactly, 5-10 minutes. No, it must have been 5 because it was nice and brief. They had a little presentation with some slides, and then they opened questions up to the audience, and different, they had a host who helped direct the questions, and so they answered many of the audience's questions. So that was like a larger event where I think there were like 70 people that showed up, right? So it could be even larger than that, but there were, so that was a larger event that was, the audience was muted, kind of more like this, where people were responding in the chat. Another organization had a much more narrow is not the right word, but specific invitation, and they invited, you know, I think they invited 20 of their top supporters, and I think something like 4 people showed up, right? So, but 4 very interested people. And they sent specific invitations to these folks. It was a conversation with the executive director, again, talking about what was different now, what was happening, and they were launching some fundraising initiatives that they wanted to tell people about, and some work that was happening. And that was a Zoom call where the people's pictures showed, and it was a much more robust and interactive conversation with a smaller group. Many of my clients are doing a whole variety of stuff, but these sort of smaller, more intimate groups have been really fabulous. And also, of course, the one-on-one conversation is really essential and important for some of the folks. Somebody's saying that they can't hear me. Is that still a problem? Put in the chat. So really please let Minnie know and continue to chat. So somebody says, so let us know if hearing is a problem. Okay, great. Somebody else says they can hear, so super. Hopefully it's not too many people who can't. So somebody, Therese writes, so an AMA, ask me anything virtual town hall. Yes, you can have one of those. So Benji, other questions that came up that you'd like to make sure that get asked?
Great. So Jen, something that we're really coming to grips with right now across the mentoring community, both locally for us and like nationally across the movement across the US, is issues of race and racism in mentoring. And going back to the storytelling piece, I'm wondering how we can, the question here is how we can go about approaching storytelling that centers young people and the work that mentoring programs are doing in an authentic and strengths-based perspective versus falling into traps of contributing to things like a white saviorism lens for the youth that we serve.
Great question. So I'm doing a lot of pretty deep thinking about this right now, and there are a lot of people doing some very deep thinking. There's a wonderful organization, and I'm going to try to see if I can think of it right now. The leader is Vu Lei. It's community-based fundraising. I want to say that it's called. And I will give this information to Minnie and send you out a link to the group after. So how do we center our youth in this conversation, and how do we actually not be just focused on the donor as the savior is a really important perspective. Couple things come to mind. One is going back to that advisory group and your larger group, and actually having a really frank conversation about how are we going to focus, how are we going to shift, how are we going to focus and make sure that our storytelling and that what we're doing is not just focusing the donor as the savior, but that our whole community together, those who have financial resources and those who don't, those who donate time and those who donate money, are all working together to support our organization and our youth and the work. So get a youth on your or more than one. Get clients on your advisory to look at your materials and to look at your storytelling and the way that you're doing that. I also really encourage you to think about what is our storytelling gathering process? Is our process respectful? And how do we engage with that? To really be mindful and intentional in the way that you do it, and to bring your clients into that conversation so that you are including them in defining and creating that process. And there's more, but those are some things that come to me in this moment. But really going, Vu is a real leader in this. There's a fabulous interview with him and Joan Garry. So if you don't know Joan Garry, Garry, she is like a fundraising guru. She writes in the all over the place, and she has a Facebook page, etc. And she interviewed Vu and his other co-leader of this new organization, Community-Based Fundraising, and a lot of the kinds of the question that this questioner asked gets talked about in that really wonderful podcast. Other thoughts or questions, Benji?
Yes. The next question we have here is, how can we utilize various online mediums, for example, blogs, websites, our social media newsletter, to keep everyone updated on what's happening with our mentoring organization, particularly through the lens of the pandemic?
So, I'm gonna ask you to repeat that in a minute, because I just got distracted, honestly, by somebody's question asking what the name of the podcast was. Joan Garry is the name of the person who leads that podcast. So if you go to search any of your podcast locations, aggregators, and look up Joan Garry, her podcast will show up, and she interviewed Vu Lei, and that's really important. So, and I will also send that to Minnie, Joan Garry, Garry. So, so Benji, let me rephrase to make sure I got your question. And people are wondering, how do we keep people updated about our work through our blogs and through our website and other social media? Did I get the question right?
Yes, you did.
Okay.
Particularly through the lens of the pandemic as well, given the changing landscape.
Well, you know, I think it's through storytelling, and it's through sharing what's really happening, right? I mean, I think it's essential to really explain to people how you're doing what you're doing. And so maybe you're telling the specifics of how you're doing what you're doing, and you're telling that through the lens of a story about what's actually really happening, right? So you might tell the story of a particular mentor and how they work with a particular student and how that has changed in this time, so that people have a real understanding about what it looks like, in addition to the more specific details of how it works and how and where you're struggling and where you need support. So like how, nobody expects any of us to have all the answers right now. I mean, I think that's really essential to say, and I'm not sure I said it, that you don't have to pretend like you got it all together. I mean, we are all in this together, and working as hard as we can to do the best for our students and our world, and we're figuring it out together. And you engage people as partners in that. Let's share with you what we're doing, and we'd love to invite you in, and we're going to be having this conversation. Or you ask people to type questions in a chat. You have a Facebook Live. There's all kinds of ways. Other questions come up?
Great. This isn't so much a question, but more just an informational thing I wanted to add. Jen, earlier on this webinar, you mentioned Wayne and his organization, Living Proof Mentoring, and he is actually on the webinar right now, and just wanted to give a shout out to people listening that he's available to help mentoring organizations with some of the storytelling challenges that we were talking about earlier through his role as a technical assistance provider with the National Mentoring Resource Center. And so his organization is Living Proof Mentoring. We can put in the chat. Thank you, Minnie, for including that in the chat. It's lpmentoring.org if you want to learn more about his mentoring organization, which serves Black youth throughout Vermont.
And Wayne, after this, I would love to get together with you. I'm really interested in your work. So let's connect. I really appreciate it. I was excited by what Benji shared. Really, really important work. Yeah.
So Jen, I do have another question for you here, and I'm reframing this slightly because it came from somebody on the call who, I believe her name was Alicia, who is a consultant for nonprofits. But as we're talking about the strategic planning process and having a plan for doing fundraising, for small nonprofits that have the buy-in to develop a plan but struggle with meeting their objectives, how would you recommend that organizations work to foster accountability that translates to the workplace culture and the staff dynamics within the organization?
Woo, big question. There are a couple of things that I think are really essential. Workplace dynamics and cultural accountability is tough and essential, and kind of even harder in some ways right now when you're not getting together with people. So what's really important, and what I'm talking to my clients about, is that that each supervisor is having at least weekly conversations with staff about what their goals are and what their plan is. A lot of people kind of need some help during this time, especially mapping out their time. They're home, they're distracted by the stuff around them. It's really a complex time to be a supervisor and with accountability. So there are a few different things. One, Google Docs are the bomb. They are fabulous, right? If you do not have shared documentation with your organization, that is the place to start. If you don't have a shared drive, Google Docs are a beautiful thing. So you're writing down what it is that you're planning on doing that week or that day, and you're sharing it out, and you are starting each conversation with your group or your supervisor or your team by talking about and replying on what it is you said you would do and what you've actually accomplished. And so that you are in a supportive conversation about what's possible. Were they unrealistic expectations? What is it that I can do as a supervisor to support you in meeting your goals? That's one thing. The regular accountability document so that it's part of your conversation on a daily or weekly basis. Monthly is not enough. One of my clients I was working with, who's a new supervisor, was meeting weekly with her supervisee. And what she was experiencing was that her supervisee was pretty depressed and really struggling and having a hard time staying on track. And she would get to the end of the week and many of the tasks weren't accomplished. So they shifted, right? So they're being nimble and they shifted, and I encouraged her to meet with her supervisee on a daily basis and help her supervisee plan her day, right? Some people need a little extra, and we work together to be collaborative and supportive while reaching and stretching and setting goals that are are stretch for us. And sometimes if we set stretch goals, we can achieve them, but sometimes we have to adjust. So that's part of it. So accountability, meetings, shared documents, and circling back to this idea of donors and engaging people at a higher level. So let's say you're a small mentoring organization. You don't have a ton of people that you can reach out to, but you did, through talking to your mentors and coming up and talking with folks, you came up with a list of 5 or 10 names of people you think might want to support your organization at a higher level. So then what? You've got to create a specific plan about who's reaching out, when they're reaching out, what are they saying, and having that on a shared document is super useful to be able to reflect on that. Where are we? Encouraging people's accountability. And one of the things that I always say to people is that, you can't just have a monthly meeting about this and expect to actually move it forward very significantly. If you're trying to turn up your leadership giving and your direct conversations with your donors, it's an active role, and I encourage there to be a weekly meeting in your organization where all you are doing is focusing on how are we talking to our supporters? Are we doing a good job? Who did we reach out to? So you're not diverting yourself on events and the color of the napkins and the social media and the other things that you're doing, but you're just focusing in on the relationships and keeping them front and center. Having one weekly meeting where you do that is a game changer. So I've gone at there. Those are a few different accountability tools. Happy to talk to people offline about other things that are possible. Other questions come up? We can take one more.
Great. So I have one more question. Jen, earlier in the presentation, you talked about sort of the power of storytelling and the power of individual stories versus looking at statistics. it's for somebody in your organization who is not at the director level, and you're trying to make the case to the person who's in charge of fundraising, what would you tell the director to help them understand that this approach is more effective, especially if they've been used to doing it from a stats-based approach previously?
Well, it's a really important question, and I'll see if I can answer it in a succinct way. One thing I would do is I would show them that chart that shows individual giving in this country. I think that's, it's pretty powerful. And I think that I think I've made the case today. And so using some of the points that I made, but I think what's really crucial is that it's a way to thank our donors, our mentors, and our volunteers by engaging them in this process. It's a way to be respectful of them and deepen our engagement with them. And that ultimately mentoring is about building relationships, right? So, I think that's where I would really start, is like, we're an organization that believes in the power of relationship building, and the importance and the way that one life can influence another. And who better to tell that story than the people who are already involved and already know about this important work? So I think that's where I think I'd begin. So thinking as you folks, we have just a couple minutes left. I'd love to hear from all of you in the chat box to what is your big takeaway today, and what really resonated with you, what's something that you might like to try that you hadn't thought of before. What's standing out for you? I'd love to hear some people put those in the chat box. Power of storytelling, improving my blog, advisory group for communications, storytelling tips, importance having a bank of stories, yes, creating community, a virtual open house, yeah. Well, I'm excited that you all have things that have come up for you, and I encourage you, as you get off this webinar, that you make a commitment for yourself. What's one commitment that you will make? Because in terms of that question of accountability, you need to be accountable to yourself and to the organization by moving forward on some of the ideas that have come up. And it's exciting to know that you're engaging with this information. This is how you can reach me. jenhazlett.com is my website, and my email is at the website. I do fundraising and communications coaching. I work with individuals, I work with boards, I work with staff teams on developing accountability tools. I do facilitation and workshops, a lot of strategic planning and that kind of stuff. And I also do work with individuals doing professional development coaching. I focus on the nonprofit sector, people wanting to make a shift either into a new career or how to step into their leadership more fully. Happy to hear from all of you. And Teresa asks, do I do board training? Yes, I do. Lots board training, often on fundraising, but how do we engage our volunteers is often a big topic that people want to be involved with. So happy to hear from you folks. My email is jenhazlettcoaching@gmail.com. Spelled the way it is here, jenhazlettcoaching@gmail.com. If you want to reach out to me, happy to hear from you. And really delighted to be here today, and happy to be invited by you, Benji. It was fun really fun to work on this together. So, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Jen. We really appreciate you taking the time to be with us. This is a great opportunity. As we close out today's webinar, I wanted to quickly share some other resources that may be of use to you in your mentoring organization. Mentor scales impact by developing and supporting a national network of more than 25 state and regional affiliates. My organization, Mentor Vermont, is an example of one of them that serves the state of Vermont. These affiliates are, like my organization, Mentor Vermont, provide the leadership and infrastructure to expand mentoring relationships in local communities or statewide, depending on whether it's a state or a regional organization. But basically, the mentor affiliate in your region serves as a clearinghouse for training, resources, public awareness, and advocacy. And so I strongly encourage you to figure out if you have a mentor affiliate in your state or in your area and connect with them to learn more about local training resources and opportunities. We encourage you, if you haven't already done so, to register your mentoring program within the Mentoring Connector, which is a national database of mentoring programs where potential volunteers can search from across the country to find a local program near them. We also encourage you, as I mentioned earlier, to check out the National Mentoring Resource Center for no-cost mentoring resources to help you apply evidence-based mentoring practices to your program. The NMRC provides evidence reviews on mentoring models and mentoring for special populations, implementation resources ranging from training manuals to mentor guides. It's reviewed by the NMRC Research Board, and there's also the opportunity to request no-cost training or technical assistance. The NMRC is made possible through a federal grant from the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. And I should say quickly that TA, because it's a federally funded grant, you can't get training through that resource specifically on fundraising, but it covers a lot of other aspects of your program, such as marketing and communications, logic models, a lot of other things that directly play into the fundraising aspect of what you're doing in other ways. And as a quick reminder, 1 week after this webinar ends here, everybody is going to receive an email that has a link to the Collaborative Mentoring Webinar Series page, where we'll have the recording, the slides, and just any additional resources that might be useful to you. Again, we would love to hear your feedback. So as you close out of the webinar today, please make sure that you take a couple of minutes just to answer the short survey and help us continue to make this series even better. Stay connected with us. Be sure to visit the Collaborative Mentoring Webinar Series page throughout the year. You can view all of the past webinars there, and you can also see information about upcoming webinars each month. We hope you'll join us next month on September 17th for our next webinar in the series, which is on designing curriculum for group mentoring. Be well, and thanks again to each of you for all that you do to support young people in your local communities. We really appreciate you joining us for today's presentation.